Welcome to Workplace Psychology with Dr. Martha Greidick. I'm Dr. Martha Greidick. This podcast examines a wide variety of work-related issues through the lens of industrial and organizational psychology. And while many of the topics discussed here may be seen as intended for white-collar employees and their employers, in reality, the ideas presented here are applicable across organizations and industries. Additionally, many of the topics discussed here may be applicable outside of the workplace. I encourage you to examine what's presented here, apply what makes sense to you, and simply discard the rest. Work can be stressful for many different reasons. When it comes to this time of year, meaning end of year, there can be additional stressors. For one, many people may celebrate many different types of holidays in their personal lives, and that can cause more stress in their life in general, which can bleed into the workplace environment. Moreover, many companies have different things that need to happen at the end of a year. Maybe their fiscal year is the same as the calendar year. Maybe it's the end of a quarter if their fiscal year is different. But either way, there may be some additional things that have to happen, that have to be taken care of, additional responsibilities, additional tasks, making the workplace that much more difficult. Whatever the reason, it's no secret, it's no surprise that the workplace can be a stressful place. And while you may already have different types of skills or tools for dealing with stress, for stress reduction and stress management, it may be more difficult to do that at work than it would be outside of the workplace. It has less to do with your abilities or how rich your toolbox or your skill set is. It may have more to do with the environment and simply having to do that stress management at work. And just as a side note, I'm assuming here that everyone watching has some kind of stress management tools, but for those of you who feel like you could use more, and more is always better when it comes to stress management, I invite you to check out my YouTube channel where you can find all kinds of exercises and ideas pertaining to stress management. So I invite you to do that. And the link for my YouTube channel will be in the description below. So check that out. But moving forward, it may be more difficult to deal with stress at work simply because of the environment. Sometimes we are expected to deal with it without bothering anyone about it when it comes to stress at work. Or we might not have the support that we need when dealing with stress. Maybe we don't have the support in terms of the environment, in terms of the people, in terms of the culture. So it may be a little more difficult dealing with stress at work than it would be dealing with stress outside of work. Not only could it be that you don't have the support at the workplace, you may also be discouraged from acknowledging stress or showing that you're stressed, whether that is something that's being done consciously by others or on a subconscious level. The end result would be the same, making it that much more difficult for you to deal with stress at the workplace. In today's episode, I want to bring to your attention the fact that there are things that you can do to deal with stress, whether it's at work or anywhere else. And as I already mentioned, I suggest that you check out my YouTube channel for different ways of dealing with stress. But there's also some things that will be valuable for you to know, some facts that will allow you to look at stress and dealing with stress at the workplace through a different lens. Remember, knowledge is power, or rather the potential for power. It depends on what we do with that knowledge, right? We can have all kinds of information, but if we don't utilize that information, that knowledge to our advantage, it's pretty much just books on the shelf that you've never taken down and read, so to speak. So let's start with first things first. When you are stressed out, there is an automatic reaction that happens. This is true for everybody. It's a fight or flight reaction, or more accurately, it's fight, flight, or hide. Hiding is another viable option. So I'm bringing this up because many people may forget that when that happens, this is an automatic reaction. Can you override it? Can you change your initial reaction? Sure. But it's important that you understand that the initial reaction, the fight, flight, or hide reaction, is automatic. So however you first react isn't your fault. It's not something you should dwell on or beat yourself up over, but rather know that this is automatically wired in us. So that's an automatic reaction. Whenever we are stressed out or we're facing some kind of big crisis, there's going to be a reaction from your body. So remember that. Don't get hung up on the fact that there was a reaction, because that reaction is automatic. In order for us to survive stressful circumstances, we're wired to do something, whether we fight, whether we get out of there, or whether we hide. So this is something that happens automatically, so don't let that bother you. Something else to consider here is that it's important to show yourself some compassion. We tend to be a lot more compassionate towards other people than we are towards ourselves. So when you're dealing with stress, especially with stress at work, give yourself a break. Show yourself some compassion. You're a human being who is dealing with a lot. So don't be so hard on yourself. So I want you to remember that. Show yourself some compassion. Give yourself a break. Be as understanding towards yourself as you would be towards others, especially towards others that you care about. When you're facing stress, it's important to identify your feelings. Whenever you face something, anything, there tends to be some kind of feeling or maybe multiple feelings associated with it. So it's important that you're able to stop long enough to identify what it is that you're feeling. If you can't name what it is that you're feeling, there's going to be a certain lack of clarity when you go to deal with the stressful situation and your reaction to it. So it's very important that you're able to identify what you're feeling. Once you identify your feelings, please take the time to acknowledge them. Don't dismiss them. You feel what you feel. It is what it is. Don't label your feelings as bad or good or inappropriate. They're just feelings. Nothing happens unless you take action based on those feelings or prompted or fueled by those feelings. So feelings are just that. They're just feelings. So once you identify them, acknowledge them. Acknowledge them for what they are. Leave away the judgment of it. Leave that aside. Don't get caught up in judgment or labeling them as good or bad. Simply acknowledge your feelings. They are what they are. They're your reaction to a particular stressful situation or stressful environment. This is part of that compassion I was talking about, right? Don't be so hard on yourself. Don't be so judgmental. Just acknowledge that this is how you feel about what's going on. It's also important that you don't simply dismiss your feelings. Once you identify what they are and acknowledge them for what they are, don't just dismiss them and don't make up excuses. Again, be kind to yourself, be compassionate towards yourself, and realize that your feelings are what they are. They're simply in response to what's going on. So don't go into this need of coming up with excuses for what you're feeling or why you're feeling it. Just let that go and don't dismiss your feelings. Feel them. Get through them. That's part of the process, is feeling your feelings, allowing yourself to feel your feelings rather than dismissing them or excusing yourself or giving excuses rather. So feel your feelings for what they are. And I know that this is the workplace we're talking about, but all of this is happening internally within you. It doesn't have to be something that you're discussing with others or that you're verbalizing. All of this belongs to a more of an internal process. So identify your feelings, acknowledge them, and then own them, so to speak. Don't make excuses and don't dismiss your feelings. The other thing that's worth mentioning here is the language that you use, whether it's the language in your head, your thoughts, or whether it's spoken language. Words matter. So when you consider a stressful situation and the feelings that you have in response to the situation, to the stressor, make sure that you are not making the situation worse by the language that you use. Now, we're not talking about being foolishly optimistic where you're not recognizing reality for what it is. That's not it. But if you have a choice between calling something an inconvenience and a disaster, you're still acknowledging that it's not what you want. But if you call something a disaster, you are rendering yourself powerless, essentially. But if it's an inconvenience, it's a lot more likely that you will be able to deal with it and take care of it. That's what I'm talking about. So watch the language that you use, whether it's spoken language or the language of your thoughts. It makes a big difference because words matter. The point of this episode is to recognize that sometimes it can be more difficult to deal with stress at work than it would be to deal with stress outside of work, simply because of the environment and the people in that environment. However, there are things that you can still do that you're perfectly capable of handling stress. For more ideas and exercises and suggestions on how to deal with stress, go to my YouTube channel and check out those videos. But more importantly, for this particular video, is the information that will help you to see the situation of stress at the workplace for what it is. For example, your reaction to stress, whether that's fight, flight, or hide, that's automatic. It's nothing to be ashamed of, and it's nothing to beat yourself up over. Your feelings are also what they are. It's not productive to be judgmental or dismissive of your feelings, but rather it's important to identify and acknowledge them. And of course, words matter. So be mindful of the language that you use when thinking about, when processing the stressful situation, whether those are spoken words or the words in your thoughts. As this episode comes to an end, let's review what was discussed. Once again, stress at the workplace is a perfectly normal thing. What's important is that we realize that we are not powerless, despite the fact that it may be more difficult to deal with stress at work because of the environment. Understanding the situation for what it is can make it easier for you to deal with stress at the office. First and foremost, your reactions to any stressful situation are automatic as part of our wiring for survival. So don't be so hard on yourself and don't judge yourself over your initial automatic reactions. It's important to recognize your feelings and own them rather than dismiss them. No excuses are necessary when dealing with stress. Simply work on getting through the situation at hand. Remember to be compassionate towards yourself. You would likely show compassion towards others, so why not yourself? And lastly, mind your words because they matter. The language you choose, whether it's spoken word or your thoughts, can make a difference in how you get through a stressful situation. For those of you who are experiencing this podcast in an audio-only version, I invite you to check out my YouTube channel where you can find the video version of the podcast. In addition to the video version of the podcast, my YouTube channel also contains videos that focus on stress management. My YouTube channel is Stress Free with Dr. G. You can find a link for that YouTube channel in the description below. Thank you for joining me today. Please subscribe to this podcast. I look forward to seeing you here again next time. Until then, I wish you joy and well-being.